I think we'll just dive right in. I'm Bob Smith. I'm responsible for leading the global gene therapy business from a platform perspective at Pfizer within our rare disease business unit. I'm also very pleased to be a member of the ARM board of directors and have been involved with ARM for a number of years, and have found it to be an exceptionally good advocate for the sector, and I think the quality of this conference is a testament to the great job that Janet and Paige and the other members of the ARM organization have really advanced their sector even in the relatively short time that it's been in existence. So very happy to be here together with Mike. So Mike, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Bob. So my name is Mike Fraser, and I'm the General Manager for Novartis Gene Therapies in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I'm very proud to be here, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. And I hope to share some of the learnings we've learned along the last couple of years as we've brought Zolgensma to the market.
Great, thanks, Mike. You know, I'll just kick off with some of the closing comments from our prior panel. And one notable comment that one of the panelists mentioned at the very end was the need for more agile frameworks. More investment in the sector, and I'm just curious with your current experience now commercializing Zolgensma here in the EU since the approval in 2020. It's relatively short life cycle of the product from an overall perspective, but why don't you share some of the unique successes, the challenges, your experience to date, and maybe in the reference of what else could we be doing to help advance similar products as more and more of them come to commercialization?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So, I mean, just as a reminder, you know, Zolgensma is really the only gene therapy to address the root cause of SMA by replacing the non-working or non-functioning SMN1 gene, and delivers protein so that disease progression can be halted. And this is a really, really serious disease where, you know, it's the leading cause of death in infants. So, has a very high unmet need. Now, when we came to market, obviously with the gene therapy, the headlines were most expensive drug in the world. I'm sure everyone saw it. We certainly did. But the issue was how to assess value, right? Because at the time, and still today, a lot is needed in terms of education, but at the time, our system is set up to value chronic medications over certain periods of time. And our system is not set up to value or evaluate one-time therapies, which potentially have a lifetime value. And I think if you compare a product like Zolgensma to many chronic products in many rare diseases or oncology, the fact that we had that headline of the most expensive drug in the world, when you consider lifetime value, is ludicrous, right? We know that products cost a lot more over a lifetime. So I think at the time, the key was actually working with payers, with patient advocacy groups, with healthcare professionals, with governments, with the press, to really educate people, and then to listen to what the issues were, right? I mean, obviously budget impact is an issue. Obviously uncertainty of what's going to happen with the product over time because data is limited was an issue. So I think we had the ability as a team to come up with some innovative solutions, right? Things like annuities to overcome the budget impact. Things like outcomes-based agreements and risk-sharing agreements to overcome the long-term uncertainty. And this is what has helped us with these innovative solutions bring this product successfully to market. But there's still, I don't think we're there yet. I think we've forged a little path, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done.
Yeah, Mike, I think, you know, the kind of theme that we've had as we've been thinking through our pre-commercialization activities with our now phase 3 programs, we're thinking through, you know, how innovative you need to be, not just in the science and the technology and the manufacturing and clinical trial design, some of the work that you need to do in potential post-approval monitoring of patients with real-world evidence and registries, but kind of this adding innovation into the commercial model. And when you and your team were thinking through this with the launch of Zolgensma, you know, beyond the items that you mentioned, like, how did you go about formulating these types of solutions? Did you pressure test them? over a period of time with payers? Like, just maybe give a little bit of a formulation of your real world, pragmatic, day-to-day.
Yeah.
How do you run the business, and how did you become successful to date?
Yeah, first of all, I think, I don't know, and I'm not trying to be boastful, but when you lead, it's not easy, right? Because there's always obstacles that you have to get through. With my team, I use the analogy of someone walking in a jungle where there's no path. You have to cut the path, and that's always fraught with obstacles. So, and when you do these kind of things in the beginning, there's only one or two people that are willing to jump on and come on board. And so the first was to identify countries that were more open to these kind of solutions. And we managed to do that. And then we were able to your point, I mean, obviously we had to work with them, sit with them, understand their issues, which I've mentioned, right? Budget impact, uncertainty, the obvious issues. And then come up with solutions that were appropriate for both parties, because it was a negotiation at the end of the day. Our main goal was to get access as soon as possible. In Europe, what we find, and what everyone knows in the room obviously, is you get approval, and then there's a delayed period of time while countries go through their health technology assessments, and access can be 1 or 2 years after approval. Yeah. Well, in a devastating disease like SMA, where really time is neurons and these babies are dying, we don't have that time to waste, right? We don't have the time to wait to get to access. So the goal was to find the countries that would jump on board quickly, and then start using them as almost, poster cases to other countries to encourage them to come on board. And that's kind of what happened. We built up a momentum, and then people started to say, okay, we see the value. We also had, the other thing you need, or at least what we found that we needed, was tremendous support. We had support from the patient advocacy groups, which was key in terms of influence, and we had support from key opinion leaders, which was also key in helping us influence the payers to make these decisions.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious in your kind of evolution of that interaction. Where was the kind of dynamic between the patients, patient advocacy groups, the payers, and yourself? Was it really a bilateral kind of development, or what was the actual role of the patient advocacy and the patient community in that kind of dialogue and that kind of tension of making the product available as quickly as possible, in the dynamic of the challenges of pricing and reimbursement?
Yeah. I'll come to that. I just want to go back a little bit, because I think what's important to note is, first of all, in the space of SMA that we were in, you only have to go back a couple of years to have absolutely no treatment, right? So there were no treatments. And then the first treatment came to market, and they themselves had access issues, and the patient advocacy groups caused up quite a stink in terms of demonstrations, which I'm sure you probably remember and recall. So I think certainly the payers knew that had happened in the past. And so what we did was obviously working with the patient advocacy groups, who were huge partners to us, right? In terms of, we still have to educate them, and still there's a lot of work to be done there. But they would be in some of the meetings with us, discussing with payers, or they would have separate meetings with the payers to discuss with them the need to bring additional therapies and additional options to the market to help with this disease. So it was almost, I don't want to say a partnership, but we were working very closely with each other. And it's not only the patient advocacy groups, right? It's also the politicians that we were educating, the healthcare professionals themselves that we were working with as well. So it was a cross-functional approach, if you want.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I think as more and more of these ATMPs get later into development, I think the education challenge is something that really requires a very thoughtful and dedicated and disciplined approach, because, to your point, some of the challenges with the perceptions of sticker price, the discussions about value, the balance of benefit and risk, these are all very challenging topics and conversations. It's hard, even for people who are knowledgeable in the space, to have these types of conversations. And as you're now expanding your portfolio, and we and others in the industry are advancing programs, maybe give some insights into how you went about that education and communication process to very effectively, diffuse and to better inform and communicate some of the challenges, with the product.
Yeah. So I think the way we looked at value and trying to convince some payers of the value, we looked at pretty much two dimensions, which are then broken out. But we looked at, what's the clinical value? What does the product actually do? And we're talking, as I mentioned, about a disease that has a tremendous unmet need.
Yeah.
And then what's the economical value? What does it bring to society? In terms of burden to the family, burden to the patient. What's the potential for these patients in the future to be contributing members of society? And using those two parameters, and then doing some work around that with the payers and with external bodies, was the way we were able to start convincing people of value. And it's important because, in my opinion, I don't think all gene therapies are created equal. I think it is going to depend on this economic and this clinical value in terms of what they can bring to the market. I don't think just because you're a gene therapy, you can come in and say we're going to be a multi-million-dollar product. I think there's going to be a lot of parameters that are going to have to be assessed in terms of the disease area you enter, the clinical value the product brings to the market, the economic value it brings to the market. And I think we've seen this in some recent examples, right? So, yeah, I think that's understanding that value and understanding how you can address the risk, which is the uncertainty, are the two areas that I think we need to continue to work on and educate on.
Were there any particular aspects of the kind of overall assessment of benefit risk that you thought were ways that you could kind of tip things in the favor of making earlier adoption, greater access? Certainly with SMA, it's a devastating disease and a rapidly progressing disease with significant morbidity and early mortality. So there's kind of a very compelling unmet medical need component to it. Yeah. But as we think through other types of products where there may actually be a reasonably good therapeutic alternative, maybe not optimal from a patient's perspective, but on that kind of spectrum of very high acute unmet medical need to perhaps a lower or less acute need, where do you think that benefit risk threshold is going to end up playing out?
Yeah, and this is where I say I don't think everything's created equal, right, across gene therapy space. However, when you look at the two parameters we spoke about, whether it be the clinic, and you could almost do a 2x2 box, right, clinical value and economic value. And I think that some of these products where what you're saying is maybe there are decent alternatives, so the clinical value they bring to the market may be a little bit lower. But in terms of the economical value that a one-time therapy brings to the market, which I guess for many of us in the room sounds obvious, but what we're finding, it's not as obvious to some of the payers. But I think that's the piece, that area, that lifetime value, that you're relieving the society of this burden of continuous treatments is something that we all need to work together to continue to push.
Yeah, it's a very kind of interesting dynamic. I think, as we heard from the prior panel, there's lots of issues from the EU Commission perspective, from earlier discussion with yesterday with some of the payers. I think it's this tension of benefit risk and the calculation of value that is going to be the real nut that we collectively need to solve. And I think the more compelling the clinical evidence, the more acute the medical need, obviously the discussion becomes easier. But one of the interesting aspects that I find is this concern that is almost universal is durability. And with the clinical trial designs, and depending upon the nature of the disease, that may be easier to prove in terms of empiric evidence that's generated and then the projection of that benefit out. How have you guys been thinking about that particular challenge in the case of Zolgensma?
I mean, that is one of the key challenges when you come to the market, and certainly in a case like this, and many gene therapies are in a rare disease space. And what that means is normally, almost always, the amount of data you're able to generate to submit for approval is limited because the patient populations are small, the studies are normally small, and you enter the market with a very limited data set. And certainly there's no durability, right? You're not going to do those studies. So this is one where the way we overcame it was by sharing the risk. Right? We offered certain deals where we had these outcomes-based agreements that were over multiple years. We had annuities with retroactive rebates over multiple years. So we said, look, we're going to stand by the product. We're going to put our money where our mouth is. But the challenge doesn't go away. And now we have data out to 6 years, beyond 6 years, and still we're getting the question, well, what's going to happen in, we were getting the question, what's going to happen in year 5? Now we get the question, what's going to happen in year 10? In year 10, we'll get the question, what's going to happen in year 15? This will continue to go on and on and on, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're all getting better as an industry at accepting now real-world evidence data. It's starting to be elevated in its importance, but that in of itself needs to be even further elevated because it's the real world. We're not going to generate clinical data in many of these diseases and these disease areas. So we're going to have to rely on other data sources like real-world evidence data.
Yeah, and I think that's where the overall kind of ecosystem of sharing that durability risk is really going to be important. And I think to some of the discussions over the last day and a half, it keeps kind of coming back as a recurring theme of how can we really solve that problem through these innovative payment and financing models. And it sounds like you guys have found a nice balance for this particular product, and maybe that'll be a good prototype for others to follow.
Yeah, initially, like I said, it was really tough. It was tough to get the first few people over the line and convince them. But now I think people have accepted the fact that we are sharing the risk, that we are willing to pay back if there is a problem. And I think then people are more open to saying, okay, let's give it a try. What we're finding, of course, is no one has yet said we're gonna value it for 80 years or the lifetime of a person. I mean, I think people are still looking at much shorter increments, like 5 to 10 years of value. And what we need to do is still push that envelope even more.
Where do you, in the kind of evolution of the rollout of the product, where are you in terms of the number of countries across the EU that you're currently commercializing? For those that are kind of in the tail of not yet having access, what do you see as kind of the barriers that remain to be addressed as you kind of complete the rollout?
Yeah. So obviously we have EMA approval. So we have approval across the EU and certain countries that are in the area as well, but not part of the EU. In terms of access now, we're well over almost 60% of the countries across the EU. We are in what we would call our tail end, and expecting access in most of these countries to come imminently within the next few months. So we're still working really, really hard to secure that access. And I think then the next thing that I spoke about was the data. We still are doing clinical studies, right? So we have a study with our IV program that's going on in patients up to 21 kilos, so the heavier children. We have a program in clinic with our intrathecal formulation, which will be interesting. That goes up to much older patients, into the teens. And then we also have 2 long-term follow-up studies, which go out to 15 years, so to generate more data. So we're working on the access, we're working on generating more data, so that we can continue to provide assurance that these products are not only safe, but they work over a long term.
Yeah. Maybe, Mike, just circling back to the early access aspect of this, any particular key learnings from your experience there that would be helpful to share with the audience and other developers? Because in addition to the challenge of benefit, risk, and durability, I think the early access question is also something that is very topical as people think through how can you benefit as many patients as possible, as early as possible.
Yeah, and there's 2 points I would say to that. I mean, I think the system seems to work sequentially, right? And we need to work in parallel. What I mean by that is we submit to the regulators and we get our approval. And then we kind of start the process with the payers, and then we get the access. And these work sequentially. And I think at some point we've got to figure out how we can make them work in parallel. Because to get an approval and not to have access as soon as possible in some ways, in my opinion, is like a travesty, especially with a disease like SMA, where babies are dying. So I think as a community, and not only the industry, but the payers, we need to find a way that we can start these HTA assessments sooner with some of the earlier data that we're able to generate. I think the second point I wanted to make was, at least in SMA and in other diseases, we know, regardless of the treatment, that the earlier you diagnose and treat these babies, the better the outcome.
Yeah.
And there are simple tools available, like newborn screening, right? Where it's a simple heel prick and you get a result, and you're able to diagnose these babies at birth and treat them within the first 30 days of life. And this is an unbelievable outcome for these babies. But yet we're still struggling to get newborn screening, to get SMA onto some of the newborn screening panels across Europe. You know, at the moment we have a target this year to have 40% of babies in Europe screened for newborn screening, 40%. So the US are at around 90%.
Yeah.
So we're still a long way behind. And I know SCID, for instance, took years, in some countries up to 10 years, to get onto the newborn screening panel. So I think, once again, where there is the opportunity to diagnose these patients earlier and easier, once again, we need to work to mobilize. These are not expensive things to do. In some countries, they can be complicated. I get it. But the outcome and the benefit of doing them far outweighs any other problem. So,
what's the kind of pragmatic challenge of getting that broader newborn screening across the EU? Is there one or two things, like if you said to me, Bob, if I could fix this today or tomorrow, you know, that number could be 90%, similar to what it is in North America.
So it's going to sound a bit weird, my answer, because I wouldn't say this for all the problems we have, but the issue with newborn screening is the heterogeneity across the countries. So some countries have very few diseases screened on their newborn screening panel. Yeah. Others have a lot. They all have different processes on how they will approve newborn screening and the needs to get newborn screening or diseases approved for newborn screening. And I think we need to harmonize. We need to harmonize across the region so that it makes it easy for people to understand what the needs are to get to the end game. Because right now, country A and country B and country C are just completely different, with different needs, different requirements, different timelines. And I think we need harmonization.
Yeah. I mean, frankly, we have a similar challenge in the U.S. where, you know, I'm based, and I know you were based for quite some time, that it's really implemented by the states. And, you know, in the United States, there's 50 states, and every one of them has their unique challenges, different cost structure, different approval process. So I think maybe the next kind of evolution of ATMPs is, you know, advancing the whole field of newborn screening, genomic testing. I think these are things that, to your point, earlier diagnosis with available treatments is going to benefit everyone, including, most importantly, the patients, but also the healthcare system overall. Yeah. Any other key learnings from your experience to date in the rollout of the program and the product that you think would be valuable for the audience?
Yeah, well, you know, I speak to what I think are like the three key areas of, I guess, of success for our product, right? And I think will probably be key areas of success for any product coming to market. And the first for me is around the science, right? What does the product actually deliver? And clearly we have an amazing product that addresses a huge unmet need, and has very, very robust data, right? It doesn't answer all the questions, of course, but has robust data. So the science was super important. The second thing for me was the team itself, right? The team was, we were given a mandate to solve problems, but it really was about collaborating and listening with the stakeholders, whether it be the patient advocacy groups who we work closely with, the payers themselves in the various countries, politicians, the press, the whole community, even industry partners, right? We're partnering with SMA Europe on a newborn screening alliance where our partners in industry are with us in the same partnership. So we need to partner. So we had the product, we had the team. The team had an attitude of, almost like never give up, right? Everyone was the most expensive drug in the world. You guys are crazy. There's no ways. But there were ways. You just had to find the ways. And I guess the third is it's just about education. We still need to educate. But we've done a good job, but there's so much more that still needs to be done. Yeah.
Maybe just on that point about your team, could you just give a little bit of insight and maybe an overview of how you've actually organized the commercial side of the business, and what were some of the key things that you found that were kind of unique versus other business lines, other therapeutic areas, and how those might have been enablers of your success?
Yeah, I think as you can imagine, within a rare disease, right, the team, first of all, are really small because you're serving a small population.
Very intimate
right?
with the patients.
Exactly. So I think we had we had small teams in the key countries, as you can imagine, the top 5 Europe, etc., and then some of the regions, unbelievable teams. But then we had a separate market access team that was at a regional level that kind of covered multiple countries and multiple payers. And then we had a dedicated patient advocacy team. At least in rare disease, my experience having come from sort of big pharma in the past, the patient advocacy group in rare disease is so super important because it's not like people don't know where to go, people don't know what to do. So this patient advocacy group become the voice almost of the disease, right? And having a dedicated patient advocacy group, having a dedicated market access team across the region, these were key things for our success.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that dedicated patient advocacy team because, within our rare disease business unit, we actually include those groups in our very early discovery research, even before we start thinking about a potential treatment or modality to address a certain indication. That the voice of the patient, even in those early research projects, is pretty critical to the overall success. Obviously, through preclinical translational research and the design of early clinical studies, it's really fundamental. It's that kind of continuum that you spoke to is really vital to the success of the programs.
Yeah. I guess the other thing I would say is, if we are able to bring newborn screening to market and really diagnose these patients early, if we are able to get access sooner and give these patients access. Now, I tell my team, I have a vision, right? Then I have a vision. And the vision for me, at least with SMA, is that one day I'll look out at a playground of older children, maybe adolescents, right? A whole playground of children, and you won't know which one had SMA because we would have diagnosed them early and we would have treated them early and they would have had the best possible outcome. And that's kind of the dream that I live with.
Yeah. Well, very, very ambitious and very noble, and you're well on your way to achieving that. So congrats on your success to date. And maybe I know we just have a minute or two here left, Mike. As you think through, your success to date, and maybe just share a little bit of your vision on where the Novartis cell and gene therapy business is going to be, on that kind of vision to any children in the playground. You're never going to know who was a SMA baby or not, but what else are you guys thinking through in the evolution of your business?
Yeah, I think Novartis have made the vision of Novartis is to reimagine medicine, right? And we've made a commitment to the space, not only with the acquisition of Avexis and with Zolgensma, but there have been recent acquisitions in other gene therapy spaces. Obviously, they're a little earlier in the programs, and I think we're learning a lot now with the health authorities in terms of what the needs are. The bar seems to be moving. It doesn't seem to be static as we're seeing. I have no doubt that we as an industry will figure it out. And while we were expecting maybe 25 to 30 gene therapies as an industry to come to market within the next 8 to 10 years, I think right now it's safe to say that there's been a little bit of a setback in the gene therapy space. Not as many are as close But I have no doubt that as an industry, the issues will be solved, the gene therapies will come to market, and as a company, we've made a commitment to stay in this space as well.
Well, there's a lot of similarities with your vision between Novartis and Pfizer. You know, we also aspire to be a leader in the gene therapy field, and we're not quite yet to the finish line in terms of completing our phase 3 studies and preparing regulatory filings, but we're very proud to share your collective success. I think, you know, one of the big value generators of ARM is our ability to share our collective successes, even though we may be future competitors, but I think it's an area where lots of challenges, lots of, you know, successes, lots of setbacks, but we're all in that continuum of learning and continuing to improve. So,
you know, I would just say, Bob, I think you talk about future competitors and what have you. I think this room here, it's a unique experience, gene therapy, right? And it's new. I don't know whether we call it a revolution or a revelation, but it is new, and we're bringing something that is in the future going to be looked back as those were the pioneers that brought these gene therapies to market. And that's all of us. That's not us. That's all of us together. And we have an incredible responsibility to do that and to work together to do that and to make sure it happens properly. And that's why I'm incredibly proud to be a part of this kind of community as we forge the way forward and make sure these things are sustainable and come to market in a sustainable way.
Yeah, fully agree and very well said. Well, we've hit our time. Mike, thank you very much. Pleasure to get to know you over the past few days. I think your knowledge sharing has been excellent for the audience, and so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.